or your ears or anything like that, because it'll be recorded for posterity. Let's get it going. Are we ready? All right. Welcome everybody. Most of you should know me. I'm Leslie Feinzig. I'm the CEO of the Female Founders Alliance. For those of you joining us for the first time, FFA is a network of founders, partners, investors, supporters that collaborate to help women and non-binary founders succeed. We have more than 20,000 people in our community and more than 1,500 verified startups, which is incredible. We are generously supported by our partners who enable us to do what we do. And today's session is in close collaboration with Microsoft for Startups, who has been an amazing partner to us. We could not be more excited to host this more intimate session. You know, usually when we do these forums, we do like a kind of broadcast style forum where it's just me and the other person talking to each other, and then we'll take in questions at the end of the session. Today we're doing something very different because we really want this to be meaningful and helpful for everybody who dials in, and so we kept registration limited to fewer people so that you can actually be more active participants in the discussion today. And so we'll talk a little bit about how in a minute, but first let me introduce our guest today, Dr. Ian Mcdonald. Ian, welcome officially to your first FFA forum.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, there are some very capable women at Microsoft, but they're already booked well in advance, so you got me.
We got stuck with you.
Yeah.
We're there to have you on here. Dr. Ian Mcdonald has been a leader and visionary in technology for over 20 years, working in a range of multinational companies such as BHP, DHL, Citadel, Ecolab, Indian, and News UK. Ian has extensive experience ranging from national and global responsibility for IT through leading software development teams. He joined Microsoft via an acquisition where he was an IT director at SwiftKey, and today he works across the startup ecosystem to help people unleash their dreams using the power of Microsoft technology. Ian is now the CTO in residence at Microsoft for Startups in London. His teams have built thousands of servers in the cloud and built services working with billions of data points per day. So we are going to get a presentation from Ian, and then if you guys all know how to raise your hand using Zoom, we're going to go straight into questions from the audience. So as you registered for today's forum, you submitted some questions for Ian, which have informed this brief presentation. And I have many of those questions here, and I can kind of get them started so that he can like answer some of the things that you asked for before you joined the forum. But we really want to make this interactive and treat this as a real conversation. So please do use the raise hand feature at any point in the presentation. And we will, it's complicated for us to mute and unmute you through the presentation, but if you raise your hand and I'll call you, we'll unmute you and get you to ask a question directly. So with that, Ian, what do you say? Are you ready to get us going?
Okay, let's get going. I'll just share my screen. Now, can everybody see that now?
I'm going to remind everybody that we are, you know, every time that we do one of these, we play conference call bingo. And so if we have any IT issues here with Zoom, blame Zoom and let's just have fun with it. Okay, we should be using Teams, right, Ian?
Yeah, although we realize it's a multi-cloud world, and I'll talk about multi-cloud a little bit. You know, the world isn't totally centric on us. We have some great stuff. So as was said, you know, I do want it to be interactive. I've put together some slides, but it's more to stimulate discussion and to bring in the questions that were asked in advance. So do put up your hand, do ask the questions. Otherwise, it'll be quite a short time. And I've got my contact details there on the screen. You are all very free to talk to me afterwards. I'm very happy to do that. The easiest one to remember is my email is just my name at microsoft.com, ian.mcdonald@microsoft.com. Cool. So I brought up the slide that I actually created 10 years ago because I was asked to, I've been talking on cloud for over 10 years now, and people said, what is cloud? And there was a couple of people asked the similar type questions in the presentation, pre-questions as well. So I thought it'd be good to go back to basics. In these things, I haven't changed a single word in this slide. It still applies very much so. Utility pricing, that if you buy 10 of the boxes, that's 10 times the price. Instantly scalable. If your system suddenly goes, your demand goes through the roof, which is a great problem to have at a startup, that the system can actually scale all the way up instantly, and it's almost infinitely scalable. We've seen things where, for example, Pokemon Go, struggles with demand and things like that initially, but that, unless you're building the next Pokemon Go, you'd expect it to handle all your load, and accessible from anywhere, anytime, basically anywhere on the planet. These are some of the expectations of cloud. And one of the questions I did see was, how do you know what size to start off with when you're building in the cloud? And the simple answer is start off as small as possible, because you can always make it bigger as you go along. And so the second part, somebody did actually ask, what is is private cloud the same as public cloud? Or is it really different? And funnily enough, I had a question on that side. What isn't a public cloud? And what I said, and the brands may have changed a little bit since, but a small VMware or Hyper-V farm. So it's the same thing as, you could call it OpenShift or whatever, small. It's not the same because it's not, instantly scalable. It's not utility pricing. It's not infinitely scalable. So I say the same thing again. Something that locks you in for years. You shouldn't have to sign a contract for 5 years, 3 years, etc. for the cloud. You may sign up for a bit longer to get an extra discount, but there is no need for you at all on a public cloud to do it. Where if you're building a private cloud, you're going to have to go and buy a whole lot of boxes, or you're locked into somebody who's done that. Something that has high initial costs. There should be basically zero cost barrier to enter. If you're starting small, it should cost you tens of dollars a month, not thousands of dollars a month. And something that requires you to install on-site equipment. Public cloud doesn't require you to do that at all. So, 10-year-old slide, but very relevant today still. Did anybody have does this trigger any questions or thoughts from anybody? And I'm happy for people to give their thoughts as well, because I know some of you are experts in what you do as well compared to what I'm doing. So any thoughts, questions?
Rory, I can't see people raising their hands if you're still meeting host. So can you on knock if you see hands raised? And in the meantime, I have some questions on this from the registration, Ian, so I'll just shoot them your way. What are the factors to consider when choosing between a public and private cloud?
And so basically what I was trying to sum up in this is, I'd only choose a public cloud. I would never choose a private cloud in this day and age, because, whether it's us, Amazon or Google, we've got basically everything you need. I mean, there was in the past the case for it with heavily regulated industries like financial services, governments, etc., decided that they had to be on the private cloud because they had to get a certain level of compliance. But now the public clouds have achieved those compliance statistics. So you even see top secret government agencies using the public cloud now.
Oh, interesting. So there's no longer a real case to be made for a private cloud at all?
Not in my mind, and not unless you're spending billions of dollars. And then even then you see most firms don't.
And then you talked about this a little bit, but how do you decide how much server space you need?
Yeah, and we'll get onto that a little bit more later as well. But it's really, you just start with the smallest thing possible. You see, because there's no barrier to getting bigger, I would just start, if you've got a web application, I'd just start with one server if you need it on a server, or I'd just put it on the web app platform and just set it at the minimum parameters, and then start to see what it is. If you've got a big launch coming up, you might decide to build it up a little bit, because if for example, you normally got 3 capacity units of whatever going, and then you've got a big launch and you're expecting 10 times the demand, you might pre-build it 10 times bigger, just tell it to get bigger and then adjust it on the day, for example. Or alternatively, if it's coming on smoothly over the course of a day, you can let the cloud handle it. It's more just pre-build bigger. If you've got a set time, if you're saying, I'm going to launch at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, and you're expecting a whole lot of publicity, that's when I'd add a bit more. But normally I'd let the cloud scale it itself. You tune it to, you tell it, because what you can do, for example, is you say when it reaches 50% capacity, add another 1 unit, for example. All the cloud type things allow you to do that scaling on that way generally.
Okay, I have more specific questions, but I think I'm going to let you go back to your slides and bring these up later.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to highlight about the cloud now is it's more than just servers. It's just more than just like ways of hosting your JavaScript code. There's a whole lot of added value services like AI. We call them, for example, at Microsoft, we call them cognitive services. These are all things that you can do as a service without having to write them yourself, or you're not having to install them on a server. You just do it on an API call. So things like sentiment analysis, spell checking, content moderation, OCR, handwriting recognition, face identification, all sorts of things like that, video insights. And to give you a couple of examples on there, there's sentiment analysis. There's a tutorial on the Microsoft website, for example, where you can you do a Twitter sentiment analysis using a low-code type environment and write it in less than an hour to work out what the sentiment is towards your brand by some very simple plug-and-play things. And you wouldn't have been able to do that 5 years ago. It would have taken you days or weeks of coding to achieve that. Another one with the video insights, for example, you can automatically do transcription of the videos as you go on, or even identify who the individual speakers are and whether they, and what their emotion is as they go. And it can detect branded objects in your video, for example. So if there's a Coke can in the video, it can label that, and it can label celebrities as well. So you've got, the cloud is far more than just servers these days. Any questions or thoughts on that, Deb?
No raised hands. Why don't we keep going and I'll interrupt you.
Cool. So what is the journey to the cloud? If you've got, for example, if you're starting out or you've got some servers lying around, it's still quite common that people will have used their local server co-hosting type, their local company co-hosting type capability to do that. So you want to start moving it, and they talk about shifting right here. And what you're doing is that if you want to, basically with a cloud, you want to do things in an automated manner as possible, so you're not having people involved. So you might have started off with a physical server. You might have a test box under your desk that you've written your example website in, for example. So the first step might be that you then build a server on the cloud, and that gets you up and running. But then the next step, you want to go towards serverless, so that what you can do is run, instead of having a Linux server where you have to install, say, JavaScript, and then you put your customized JavaScript on top of that, you just stick your customized JavaScript right on top of serverless. So that then you're not having to run a Linux server, you're not having to update the patches on it, or you're not having to install a Windows server and updating the patches every month. You're not having to worry about all the user administration, things like that. So, then you want to go to that and you get to a better state. And then the holy grail is really if you can do no code or low code type environments. And this is where I talked about that sentiment analysis, because of that Twitter thing, when you can go into Azure, and the other cloud providers have similar type tools as well, I should say, is that you can drag and drop, you say, hook it up to the Twitter API, pull in the tweets on this topic, and then you then graphically connect it to a sentiment analysis thing, and then you graphically connect it to a email sender, so it sends you a report every hour or every day on it. So, you should be as lazy as possible when you're using the cloud. You want to use things as much as possible on the right-hand side, because, what is better for your startup? Is it better to be administering Linux servers, or is it better to be adding features to your product? And I think we all know the answer to that. So, I'd say be as lazy as possible and use the advanced features. The actual added bonus of it is that they're generally cheaper the more automated the features are too. So you get a double bonus. Any thoughts, questions that are coming to mind here?
Let me ask questions here. If anybody wants to speak up, please raise your hand. So tell us, with Azure, for example, how do you physically migrate from the towards the right hand side? Because there's a lot of talk of low and no code startups out there. But if you're someone who's just starting out or who has been working minimally, how do you look into who do you connect with? How do you migrate towards the right hand side?
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're a new startup, I'd encourage you to start on it straight away. So forget about the traditional ways. We call it the Power Platform at Microsoft. Different companies have different brand names. So have a look at that. If you are, if you've already built, say, a Linux server, then you can actually pick up the JavaScript. I use bundles. You can pick those up and you can put them in fairly easily into that. It's not too hard once you start to understand the capability. It's not too hard to do. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult, and those are sort of in between, and it's called, people often call it platform as a service. Those are quite easy to extract your code from your box, put there. Where it takes a little bit more work is where you have things like function as a service, or people also call it serverless, which is a little bit confusing because there's multiple kinds. And this is what AWS call Lambda and Azure call functions. And what you do is that is about rewriting your code and rethinking how your code runs. And that kind of serverless coding, what it does is everything is based on some sort of trigger. So for example, if you have to do something once an hour, you just say, run this code when on an hourly execution, for example. Or you might say, when somebody makes a web request, then run this code. And so it's all trigger based. It might be when somebody inserts something into a database, then run this code. So that does require a bit of work. You have to sit there and think, because rather than your code running in a more traditional way where it's running all the time, you have to think, what are the actions that cause something needing to happen? So it's just changing your thinking a little bit. But the good news is it still works with JavaScript, it still works with Python, it still works with C#. It works with the tools that you're already using. So you don't have to learn a new language. You just have to rethink a little bit on how you do it.
So in your current role and just in your trajectory in general, you've worked with lots of different startups and lots of different organizations that have run this journey. Can you I want to make this more tangible for people, particularly for the non-technical CEOs that are dialed in or that are watching. Can you give me a real world example that you worked on where this was done well, and a real world example where it was not done well?
So we've had startups that they've basically come in and they said, we don't want to spend too much money on all these developers because we don't know whether they will get good market fit. People mightn't like our product; they might want to tweak it. So we've seen people code on our Power Platform, and I've seen a few startups do this where they do it in a way that's low code type thing. And it is a bit kludgy. It's not perfect at times. But then they can work out and iterate quickly and make adjustments very quickly. And then if there's parts that get heavily used, then they write some of the serverless code or even infrastructure as a service. So they take the assumption of, I'm going to do this as simple as possible and then iterate very quickly. So those are good examples. And, if your tech team's sort of saying, well, it's going to take 6 months to write a prototype, then that it's probably they're not doing those sort of things. So you want, it's people who are saying, I can get something whipped up in a month to test out some ideas. Those are sort of signals that you're looking for from your tech team, and also that they've done something successful before. And on the contrary side, you get, what I've seen is people have come from a traditional background, quite often from the enterprise background, where they over-engineer it, they overthink it right from the start. So I was talking to a startup yesterday actually who came out of the media sector, and they wrote dozens and dozens of pages of architecture diagrams, and they were planning it all out to the nth degree of how it was all going to work, but they hadn't even tested, whether the market wanted their product, let alone whether their product was built right, sort of thing. Well, they had potential customers, but they hadn't shown and demonstrated their product to them directly in a working manner. So, and they, funnily enough, are running on a 3-month project. They're running 6 months behind right already. So, you know, they're 9 months into a 3-month project and about 20% of the way through. So, you know, I'd say don't over-engineer at the beginning. You know, the time to start really putting strong engineering in is, you know, once you've got good seed funding, you're going to start making it a little bit better and a little bit less glued together. When you get to your Series A is when you start to, you know, you're probably going to what I see is that people rebuild their system a bit at seed. They go from the prototyping to, you know, a bit more solid. Then at Series A, they re-engineer and make sure it's really robust. It's sort of Series A funding type thing. And that's because then you've got the money to do it as well. So I digressed a little bit, but I hope I answered the question there.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Okay, so building on the cloud and getting started, you know, the hardest part, you know, whether it's software as a service, you know, low code, whatever, or building a system is getting started. I find the biggest barrier by far is I don't know how to do it. This is too hard. It's, you know, take the Nike slogan, just do it. You know, start building, you know, start doing it. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but, you know, just get in and do it. One of the things also is get in there and enable e-commerce. I'd say in this day and age, unless you really need to, don't go and build your own e-commerce system. Some people do have, you know, if you're an e-commerce startup, if you're a fintech, I get it, you need to build your own stuff. So I'm not trying to discourage those type of people. But for the rest of us, Stripe, Shopify, in Europe, there's one called Klarna, which is about customers being able to pay later in installments. Because credit card acceptance isn't quite so wide in all parts of Europe. But yeah, plug-in tools like these so that you don't go and write a whole shopping basket. Don't go and write a whole credit approval engine. You know, you're going to spend many, many months in that where you can integrate in less than a day with these other people. Yeah, sure, they're going to take 5% of your revenue or whatever it is, but that's going to be a lot less than the cost to build at the early stage. And then when you get to a bigger stage, you can negotiate with your suppliers. Particularly at the moment with COVID-19, etc., the tolerance for mistakes and problems is higher now. So you should move much, much faster because you've got a chance. You know, I don't like I think it was Facebook who said move fast and break things. I don't like that slogan quite so much personally because it's, you know, the attitude's coming from, but it makes more sense now and being able to take risks and do that. And as I said, that, yeah, because of the current situations, act as if your business survival depends on it, because in many cases it does right now in this unusual times. So, and yeah, there's a quote there from Elon Musk there, yeah, if things are not failing, you're not innovating enough. And looking at that, not just in your systems breaking, but in how your product is, you know, keep tweaking it, you know, or Silicon Valley loves to say, keep pivoting, you know. And sometimes, you know, pivots can be big, you know, your whole thing's a failure, and other times it's just pivoting on something you're already doing. So you might find you might have a shopping site that happens to have reviews on books, for example, and it turns out that the most popular thing is the book reviews, not the actual buying the books. And so you change into building it more to focus around the book reviews and the interaction for people who love reading books. So to do those sort of type of things. Cool. Anybody have thoughts at this point?
I have lots of thoughts about failing fast.
You can share some if you like, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it's hard to fail, right? I think it's like really scary. The proposition that everything that you're pouring your heart and resources into might be wrong or might not be the thing is like terrifying, but and so it keeps a lot of us from really pushing it to the edge, from like really discovering if it's going to work or not. The flip side is if it's not going to work and you never discover it, then like you're spending all your time on something that was never going to happen in the first place. So we work a lot on that with the members of our community, and I love to see it reflected back here as well. Like it's really an opportunity cost of your time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Cool. So For a second here, I'm going to talk about containers, because you probably hear this bandied around a fair bit, and you'll hear Kubernetes bandied around a fair bit, because they're quite trendy in cloud at the moment. And there's actually good reasons for them to be trendy. Sometimes geek trends can be just trendy for the sake of being trendy, and there's not real business value. But the advantage, there's a simple way to explain the advantage of the containers, in many ways the business advantages. Because for many, many years, the developer has built something and they said it runs on my box. They go and put it on the web server or the cloud, whatever, and it breaks in random ways. And they say, but it works on my machine. What a container does, amongst many other things, is it defines exactly what is made up on that thing. So with a server, typically people poke around and alter configuration files and run scripts in this, where a container, it's a lockdown state, in effect, defining exactly what it is. It's like a recipe that you can't really alter, that it has to follow that recipe every single time. And so what that does is it then makes it much more efficient. And it also means, you know, particularly when you're version control, you can work out what's happening on, you can work out when it's gone wrong, what caused it, etc. So it just becomes a much more efficient way. Underneath the hood as well, it also means that you only need the resources you need to run the particular bits that you need. So what that means in short terms is it saves you money as well. So it makes it more reliable, because you know it will work across all the places, and it saves you money. And it's also relatively easy to build and deploy compared to other things. And if you hear container and Kubernetes, what Kubernetes is a way of managing containers. So you have lots of containers to do lots of individual things. And Kubernetes is what they call an orchestrator, and it ties all the bits together. And so it makes sure the containers have somewhere to run. Any questions on containers?
No questions here. Let's keep going.
Cool. So cost. There's a few questions raised on cost, and it's always a big issue because people think, oh, you know, suddenly I'm going to get a bill for $1 million, and no, you're generally not. And what you can do, and I should have put that on the slide, you can actually put in budget alerts. You can put in things where it stops the spending. You can do things like that, and I should have put that up front, and I forgot about that, but I remember now. There are things like cloud cost calculators. All the three major clouds, you just Google, say, you know, Azure cost calculator, and you'll see that will, you know, appear, and you can work out there. You can say, I've got this and this and this. What does it do? And it has also sample configuration. So you can say, I want to run a web server and a database. So, you know, what are the bits that I need, and how much will that cost me per month? And you can base that on the amount of traffic. So, yeah, you've got that there. There are cost management tools, so you can do, you know, like graphical analysis of how you spend the money, so you can work out which part. Yeah, you're not just going to get a bill of so many, you know, hundreds or thousands of dollars and not understand how you spent that money. So you can analyze, and you can do that on a daily basis if you want. You can check it. You know, you can set alerts, so you can say, okay, this part's going to cost me money, so I better tune it a bit. And generally, you know, you can estimate what the cost is of your cloud, but it won't be quite what you expect. Some parts will be more expensive, some parts will be less expensive. And I say to people, don't get too tied up in this initially, because generally, you know, what you can do is build it and then work on, you know, reducing the cost for the bits that start to cost you a bit of money. Because if you think one bit's going to cost $10,000, one bit's going to cost $10, and it turns out the other way around, you're wasting all that money trying to save on the $10 one where you need to be on the 10,000. So start to see where it's going, and you can do that very quickly. You can see the spending tick up in the hours as you deploy, so you're not suddenly going to run out of money. Now, so you can use this cost management tools. There's things called spot or reserved instances to save money. Spot instances are basically the cloud providers sell their excess capacity at some sort of discount. It can be 10% one day and 90% the next day, basically because it's a waste for us to have these capacity going unused. So you can do that. And what happens is that if a customer actually needs it, who's paying full price, you'll get thrown off the box. And you think, well, I don't want to be thrown off the box, but some parts like your data analysis might be okay to be interrupted and then resume later on, where you're, say, you're front end to your customer, you don't want to do that. So that's one way. reserved instances, this is where if you agree to take a service for a year or 3 years, you get 30 to 60% discount typically. So it's just a way of saying if you know how much you're going to spend, then you can save some money. Free tiers, there is, all of the cloud providers have a certain amount you can use for free. So you can search for that on the internet and you can work out, well, if I build to this size, I'm not going to be charged at all. So you can use that for your prototypes or your development environment or staging, so things like that. Startup credits. We all have startup programs where you may be applicable to get a certain amount of credits for free. Microsoft specializes in B2B startups and helping B2B startups grow and to get customers. So we focus heavily on startups there. So that may be quite applicable, and I'll put up a URL at the end to tell you how to look at that. As I talked about earlier, use platform as a service or serverless, those ones further along the right, because they're cheaper generally and you save on the staff costs of having to run your servers. We talk about scaling out and not scaling up. What this means is rather than having one box and making it bigger and bigger and bigger, have lots of little boxes. So design your application in a way that can run in parallel. And so rather than all, what we talk about is store your state in something like in a database. So yeah, your information is database, and all those like the web servers or the backend servers, they just run a transaction and they could run on any one of it, however many boxes. And so rather than having to make that box bigger and bigger, you can just automatically add boxes as you go. And that will save you lots of money because smaller boxes are cheaper than bigger boxes and you'll generally need less of them, provided you sort of design it well. So questions on costs?
I'm going to chime in here. We have a question on a different topic, but let's talk about costs, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lynn Becker. So Lynn, I'm going to unmute you in a few minutes, okay? So on this slide, we had a bunch of questions that, as you would expect in the registration. Before I go to those, I want to mention that through the Microsoft for Startups partnership with the Female Founders Alliance, all of the B2B startups that are selected for Accelerator Ready Set Raise get $25,000 in credits. Rory, am I overstating that? No, that's correct, right? So you get around $25,000 in Azure credits, which is a spectacularly generous offer. And then all of FFA startups in whatever sector they are in. So for all of you consumer startups, anybody who doesn't make it into the accelerator, we also offer $5,000 in AWS credits. And we're not the only ones. These are very commonly found in like a number of pitching competitions, communities, et cetera, et cetera. Keeping that in mind, Ian, you're an early stage startup, you're like faking the back end, right? You're like testing things out. It's time to start building. How do you think about choosing between the three? And I recognize that you work for Microsoft, but like talk us through the decision tree when like, you're basically having to choose between the three like major clouds or like secondary ones.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, each cloud provider's got its strengths that are particular to them. For example, Microsoft has strong data analysis tools. We've got very strong AI that I covered briefly, and we've got strong support for B2B startups. And you'll find Google's got tools that are very popular like Firebase and BigQuery. And if you have a look at those and you like them, then people will often go on the Google Cloud. And Amazon's known for B2C and early stage startups. So, yeah, it's really looking at it. One thing I will say to you is that for the standard price, if you're going to buy a server or a database or whatever, all three cloud providers are pretty much matched in price. So you're not going to get direct price differentiation on commodity things because it is a competitive marketplace. So don't spend hours trying to work out which one's slightly cheaper on that because they're about the same. There are some exceptions here. If you are using Microsoft Windows or Microsoft SQL Server, funnily enough, Microsoft being the inventor of those, they do run more cost effectively on Azure. So you will see that. And in containers, it's widely considered that if you're using those heavily, that Google and Microsoft lead the field in that, for example. And you know, we've actually both got founders of the Kubernetes project working for us and leading large teams. So those are some of the things, but it really comes down to, you know, looking at it. And there may be some, you know, things in the opposition cloud, I hope it isn't, but there may be some things that we just don't have, for example, and you might use it. The other thing I would say is consider multi-cloud. You can mix and match the bits.
Yeah.
If you happen to be on Amazon today and you look across and you like our AI services and you can't get those on Amazon, then you can use those from Amazon. Fine, you can make a web call out to our AI. There's nothing stopping you doing that at all. So it often is a multi-cloud environment where you pick the bits that you need from each cloud if you do need to have things that are unique to each cloud.
That was my next question was going to be on switching costs. You know, Microsoft releases something, you change it, whatever, right? Like you want to switch. If you make the decision, are you tied into it? Are there high switching costs, or is it like, is there a stage at which it's still quite easy to change suppliers? Or is a strategy always, like you said, like multi-cloud?
It really depends. A lot of it depends on a couple of things. One is how much you rely on a proprietary technology from the cloud provider. You know, for example, I've talked about how our serverless, our low code environment, the Power Platform, is very powerful, and it is. You can save a lot of money using it. But if you went to decide you're going to go all on Amazon, you would have to write that stuff from scratch. You'd have to rewrite it, and they may not even have the tools that match. And so that part becomes very high. But if you're using a generic container on generic Kubernetes, it's quite easy technically to switch. So it depends on whether you use a proprietary product or not, on the ease of it. On the cost part, it really depends on how much data you've got. Because you have to pay data transfer costs when you move between clouds. So if you're a data heavy business, then it can be very expensive to move between cloud providers. Often, not always, but the cloud providers will, you know, if you talk nicely to them, they may give you some form of credit just because they say, you know, okay, we recognize it's going to cost you X thousand to move this data across, so we'll give you some form of credit to bridge that cost gap. And we consider in many ways our startup credits are a bit like that, because you might be, you know, half the people are going to be on a competitive cloud provider, and we recognize that you know, it's going to cost you money to move across.
Okay, let me hand it over to Lynn Becker. Lynn, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question directly. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I appreciate.
Can you tell us your name, pronoun,
Okay.
company? What do you do?
Sure. Thank you. I am Lynn Becker. I am a CEO and a new founder as well. In my company is called Power of Patients. It's a traumatic brain injury registry, but it is like no other. I come from the clinical trial research world for over 25 years, and I'm creating a full stack patient registry that's patient-centric. So I'm working, instead of from EHR records down, I'm working from patient integration up. And TBIs are very, very understudied. With that, I'm building some AI models, and in that AI model, I have to incorporate the digital narrative of the patient, so a lot of free-form text. And then we do scoring in terms of cognitive scoring, and we're looking at social determinants of health in terms of what are these triggers kicking them off into these black holes, you know, in terms of reverse recovery. And along with that, when we want to add additional context that we collect the tonal inflections, so the AI will incorporate audio, which is very, very good, and then imagery. And the imagery is shape-based as opposed to specific, like it's an eye, but it's not the iris. So we are building, you know, I'm very familiar with designing systems. I actually worked I am a huge fan of Azure, by the way. I worked with the big data for the Defense Health Agency and the Department of Defense when we merged their every single base's repository, healthcare repository. So I get the container design functionality, and the smaller the better, because just portability, right, and flipping it around. But aside from a unique identifier to thread a person's data across these containers and spectrums, what other ideas should we be considering with the differences of these kinds of data between the audio, the image, etc.?
So what I heard you talk about unstructured data, you talked about audio, you talked about those things. So it's probably going to make sense for you to use a data lake. So Azure Data Lake will allow you to store those objects, and then you in effect can run queries using Spark, or there's a leading one, and you can either use Spark on a product we call HD Insight, or you can use Spark on a company called Databricks, who integrate fully in the Azure portal, and that allows you to work across that data and bring order to it. And a data lake on Azure now, if you're used to storage accounts where you store blobs or binary objects, is now both a data lake and a binary and a blob store. It's not two separate things. You don't have to build your data lake. You get it for free now in Azure. Yeah, free effort I'm talking about here. So it becomes much easier to use it on. And then you talked a bit about, you know, the unstructured text. There's also language understanding services. Lewis, I think it's language understanding inference service, but the I might be wrong, where you can actually get the etymology of the words and what they're trying to say in the free text, what's being said. You've got those sort of type things. You've got the sentiment analysis, looks at the tone variation as well in audio. And so you've got those type of capabilities to tie it all together. And then, so those are some of the ways that you can do it. Yeah. Okay,
that's great. Thank you so much.
But just search on the internet for Azure Data Lake and we'll get and Spark, and it will get you started. Spark being SPARK.
Yep. Thank you.
No problem.
We are at the 45-minute mark, so I want to encourage everybody to raise your hand, and I will unmute you if you want to ask questions of Ian directly. Ian, do you have healthcare? Great. How many slides do you have left to see if?
One or two, I think. I mean, one is just a summary slide. So this is, I've got 3 slides, and only so which will take me a minute to go through.
Okay, so everybody, if you have questions, if you want to participate in the conversation, please do raise your hand. Don't be intimidated. We're here to talk. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
So this is sort of relevant, carrying on the question that was just asked. Healthcare, we do have full support for FHIR FIRE, which is a standard for healthcare services and servers. And APIs, so we now have that. We have a lot of interesting health stuff, and you might want to connect with me offline if you're not already talking to Microsoft people. Our Microsoft Health has actually come from Microsoft Research, and we've got a lot of amazing people on that side. I was at SwiftKey that got acquired by Microsoft, and we were part of Microsoft Research for quite a while, so I got to know the research people. Main thing to watch out for with healthcare is privacy and regulations. There's so many of them, and we take care of a lot of the compliance type of side of things, but not all. And I bring out this slide, and you don't need to read the detail particularly. It's got a lot of words on it. But what I'm trying to say here is people can either think one of two things: compliance is a nightmare, or the cloud's magically going to take care of compliance. And the truth is somewhere in between, because we take care of many of the things of compliance, just as other cloud providers do too. We're not the only ones. But some of it is your responsibility. Like obviously we take care of the physical responsibility for compliance to make sure the data centers are secure and things like that. but we can't be responsible for your code that you've written. You know, you've got to make sure that part's compliant. So what I'm trying to say here is that compliance is a shared journey. So if you're dealing with regulations, it's a shared thing. And we've got a whole lot of information on there. Again, search on the web for Trust Center or Microsoft Trust Center, and it will tell you about how we can help you if you're in a regulated industry or need to worry about privacy. And this is my last slide, in which I'll leave up here, which is just talking about the different resources that you've got available to you if you want to learn more about our version of the cloud. So that is actually the end of my presentation. So now it is totally Q&A.
Okay, if anybody has any additional questions, please do raise your hand. I think you may have stunned them into silence. Or just like put it in the chat window. Ian, can you share your email once again for this?
Yes, it's ian.mcdonald at microsoft.com.
And we'll have multiple opportunities for folks in our community to connect with Ian and with different people from Microsoft for Startups. You guys have been great mentors for us in the past. So this is not the only opportunity for you guys to connect with each other. I've been looking through the questions that came in the background, and I think that we went through most of them. So let me just ask like a wrap-up question. You know, how much, oh, there you're typing. At what point do founders need to bring on board like substantial expertise in this area? Like, when does that happen? When do I go from free credits, test and learn, you know, build quickly, fake as much as possible, lean into the things that work, to, and I think you mentioned the Series A, but like for, you know, for our community, the benchmarks are different, right? Like not everybody raises. So how do I think about managing my own like journey as a CEO through scaling the technical backend of what I'm building?
Yeah, I mean, my preference, and I come from a technical background, so I am biased, is I'd like to see a technical founder from day one, but a real co-founder. I recognize that's not always possible, so you might, you know, employ a contract developer, an outsource firm to build it. There is there's good podcasts about starting there. I'm trying to remember her name. I will just pull up I'll get a URL where she talks really well about the different things you can do, you know, as a founder and how you start. I'm just trying to find the URL. And but I'd say definitely at seed you want to do it, because basically you get angel funding, as I see it, on an idea, and you know, and then start to do you're building your prototype, and then on then your seed funding is to take it and start to get revenue, improve your market fit. So I think it becomes critical at seed funding time to have, you know, your technical hires if you haven't already. So that is the key part of when you need it. Now I am just going to switch back and post into the chat. This is actually a former colleague of mine, coincidentally, at SwiftKey, but she's starting a business to help women entrepreneurs from a technical perspective. She's based in the UK. But in particular, I'd say on her website, you'll find links to her podcast. Go listen to them on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to podcasts. Absolutely brilliant about how to build the technical journey and how do you start as a non-technical founder? How do you do that? She's actually running an event on Friday about how to build a successful app. I couldn't recommend her highly enough. So go look at her website and do that. She answers it 10 times better than me.
Well, we'll definitely connect with her ourselves as well, because we get those questions a lot. We have another question here from the audience from Michelle Tsao. Is Microsoft Cloud B2C friendly?
Yes, it is. So, you know, you can build B2C on any of the 3 cloud providers. So we've got all the technology that you need for it. where we're not doing quite so much is on the financial support for B2C founders, to be very honest. You know, like if you start to get up towards, you know, being a larger startup, you know, getting millions in revenues, then of course we can work out how to accommodate you at that point there and do good deals. But yeah, the product is great for it. There is loads of B2C, because what we're seeing, for example, and I'll phrase this carefully, companies are a little bit wary of using Amazon because they're a big B2C company themselves. And they're a very capable technical company, but people who are in that retail space feel a little bit uneasy about it, and they will often run on Azure or Google as an example. And Azure, I just want to make clear, AWS have great technology. I'm not maligning them at all, but that is often something that happens, and that's where we get a lot of it. You know, people like Walmart dictate that people have to run on, you know, non-Amazon clouds, for example. So we see a lot of B2C companies come in through that means. And so, and we're seeing that in an increasing amount in general, that customers will often dictate which cloud you have to use. And Azure is actually used a lot in the Fortune 500, for example.
One thing that we didn't talk about, Michelle, let me know if you have a follow-up question, and I'll unmute you if you want to talk any further. One thing we didn't talk about is the smaller suppliers, right? So there's actually many companies offering different cloud services out there. I know that we work with IBM as another one of our partners, and they like to work specifically with fintech and insurtech companies. So if you are one of those, we'd love to connect you with them as well. But can you tell me about, like, what are some of the other smaller suppliers, and what are the instances in which founders and CTOs should think about, like, a non-big three?
I think, you know, it comes down to what people, generally it's often with personal relationships. I see, like in France, there's a very popular one called OVH. You know, you get IBM used in some industries. I mean, competition's great. It really comes down to if there's a particular market fit for you. I mean, the reality is that right now, the big three control the vast majority of the market. You know, I would love to see one or two more other cloud providers rise up. There's always people there, you know, like, you know, IBM look like they're rebuilding their cloud offerings and trying to do things. HP look like they're doing things. Most cases for IBM, it's because they're existing IBM customers. You know, they've now gone and bought Red Hat, so that might change the dynamics, I don't know. And then you see people use quite specialized cloud. Salesforce has a loyal customer base with Heroku. Heroku is their cloud provider, their branding. And people, because if they're using Salesforce a lot in particular, then Heroku becomes quite popular. And again, if people are using Oracle databases, Oracle is quite popular. They're starting to try and build out more of the public cloud. So it usually comes to some other connection to the company as a big thing. Or alternatively, it's a local provider that they know personally. That's what I've seen.
Got it. Okay, so with that, unless anybody else raises their hand, I think that we are going to wrap up today. Ian, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We're going to make your contact details available afterwards for everybody that dialed in and for everybody who watches the replay of this. Also, I want to remind everybody, not remind, because I think that we have not announced this, I believe, and I'm very excited. We have, the next session is with very famed angel investor Jason Calacanis on July 21st. So I get to interview Jason and see what advice he has and see who he's going to invest in next. So with that, we're going to call it a day. Thank you so much, everybody, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.